Yo, welcome back to the channel, boys and girls. It is quite a windy day here in Chicago. Today we are doing a follow-up on my Tavelo Attack frame set and these craft racing work wheels, because now that I've been able to spend a couple of months with this bike, I've taken it on some crazy climbs not too far outside of the city, and I think now is the perfect time to give you guys a follow-up. So without further ado, let's get busy. Beautiful late spring day here in Chicago. We are somewhere south of downtown, somewhere near like Hyde Park, and because of the time of year, that means that it is about to get super humid here in Chicago. I'm sweating like a pig. But let's just quickly talk about the bike, the specs as a whole. So this is my Tavelo Attack, as you guys know by now. This is a size 56. The geometry is a little bit on the shorter side because it is intended to be an all-around frame. But nonetheless, I've got it almost dialed in, but I could use a little bit more reach. So starting with the front, so we have these FarSports. I think this is their FS1 cockpit. They are extremely stiff. I like them a lot. The width on these is 38 centimeters. The stem is 130, which lends itself to be more like 135, 140. It also includes this mount for your computer, which is a really nice touch. Of course, we got Shimano Di2 12-speed, which I absolutely love. One thing I like about these levers is it offers up enough space so that your hands can comfortably brake with just one or two fingers. Next up, let's talk about the wheels. So these are the Craft Racing Works CS 5060 wheels. These wheels clock in at like 1,300 grams, which is incredibly light for the depth. You have 60 in the rear, 50 in the front. The front wheel, they are a little bit on the wider side. I believe it's like 24, 25 internal, like 32 on the external side. They are, unfortunately, this front wheel, they are pretty bad in the crosswinds, at least where I ride. So just keep that in mind. The rear wheel is not any issue with crosswind at all. It's just the front wheel, but they are incredibly light. They're very responsive. And I just like the way that they feel on the road. They're also very comfortable as well. And moving on to the saddle, this is a S-Works saddle. It's not the cheapest saddle on earth, but it does weigh only 167 grams, which I like. Next up, let's talk about the drivetrain. So we have a 5339 crank out front, and then in the cassette we have an 11 to 30. We got the Novaride oversized pulley wheel with the ceramic bearings inside the jockey wheel. Also Novaride ceramic bottom bracket as well. It just, everything just super duper smooth with the ceramic bearings, also with the ceramic bearings inside of the Craft Racing Work wheels. And then I'm also using a wax chain courtesy of Cyclowax as a brand, and I've done videos on all the components I'm talking about, so feel free to find them on my channel. Then let's talk about the spider based power meter. This is from Magene. This is their QED. The spider power meter itself runs for like $300, and then you can also opt for the chain rings for like an additional $50 or $60. So like $350 all in. You get everything you see here, of course, minus the pedals. The power meter is very accurate. I've also done a video on this too, to provide some evidence that it is just as accurate as my my Smart Trainer and even my Quirk spider-based power meter as well. And then these are the new, or the latest generation of the Look Keel Blade carbon pedals. These have just a wider contact patch. I like them. They don't feel any different than the previous generation, but just keep that in mind as well. But as a whole, just the way I have this bike set up, I really I like everything about it. Now, comparing this bike as a complete package to something like my Windspace T1500 frame set, I do prefer the Windspace just from an emotional attachment standpoint. This bike is definitely more refined though. It's completely inoffensive. It feels like a premium bike. There really aren't any negatives about it, especially if the geometry fits you. The Windspace, on the other hand, is a little bit more wild. It's a little bit kind of more crazy, and honestly, it's even a little bit more exciting. But I understand that not everyone wants that, because some of that excitement is due to the fact that the Windspace is a very stiff frame. You are definitely going to feel a lot more bumps on that frame versus this one. But if you had just maybe one bike to rule them all, this Tavelo is probably a better option than the Windspace. It's just that the Windspace is just my first love, so I am pretty biased in that respect. but on paper, this is a better bike than that one. So comparing this bike to say something like my Giant Propel, I don't think I've done a full-on review on my Giant Propel just yet, but what I will say when it comes to the Giant Propel is just the way that bike is set up and how it's engineered. That bike does climb a little bit better than this bike, but this bike also climbs well as well. And both of those frames, as a entire frame set, they actually weigh almost identical. So I'll say that the Giant Propel climbs a little bit better. It's definitely more stiff than this bike is, but this bike is very stiff as well. They're comparable, but just on the last, I would say 10/10 of the experience, that obviously the Giant Propel is going to be better. But for this price point for the frame set itself, I think it's like 1,580 grams last time, not grams, price, $1,600 as far as I know the last time I checked. You are getting a lot for the price, and it does definitely feels premium, and it feels like it punches above its weight. Now obviously if you do have the budget for like a Giant Propel, it is going to be a slightly better experience. It's probably not going to be twice the experience because it's almost twice the price, but do keep that in mind. And then comparing for something like the wind space, I think the wind space is slightly more exciting than this as well, but this one just as a whole just feels like a better, more comfortable, well-rounded cycling experience. And now that I've been riding this bike for a couple of months, what really inspired me to finally follow up with you guys on this bike is because a couple of weeks ago, I did my annual ride out on the countryside, where basically in the span of like 60 miles or 100K, you can get upwards of at least 5,000 feet of climbing and elevation. What is that, like maybe 2,600 meters? I don't know, you guys do the math. I don't know. I'm an American and that's all I care about. Just kidding. But I love the way this bike climbs. Some of these climbs out in the countryside are upwards of like 17%, so you really get to tell how stiff this bike is, and I love the way that it climbs. In fact, it climbs so well that I didn't even have to use my smallest gear, which would be the 3930 out front, because just the way it responds when you're out of the saddle, especially the way the front end is set up with the cockpit being so stiff, it climbs very well. For sure climbs way better than my Windspace T1500 frame set does, and almost as good as my Giant Propel. That one does have this one beat a little bit, but I love the way this bike climbs. And for how light it is, I want to say it weighs like, I already weighed it in the previous video, but it weighs like 7.1 kilograms. If I went with a paint option that was much lighter than white, because white is usually the heaviest color, you can definitely get this bike under 7 kilograms. You could probably even get it to like 6.8 kilograms. But I love the way this bike responds. The only negative is on the descents where you're going like 40 miles an hour plus, the front wheel is pretty unstable. I probably wouldn't use these wheels again out on the countryside on the rolling hills, so do keep that in mind. So I gotta be honest, right now the state of bike reviews currently is in complete shambles. If you're an independent reviewer such as myself, people are gonna say, oh well, you're not an engineer, you don't have a lot of experience with bikes, so your opinion is invalidated. Or they might say, if you are an engineer, they're gonna say, oh, you're being overly anal about the details of these bikes and the specifications, and people seem to have a problem with that. Or if you are a reviewer from, say, something like a GCN or one of these corporate style bike reviewers, people also have a problem with that, where they're gonna say, oh, you probably were paid for this review, so you're being completely biased with your statements. So I don't really know what the solution is for all of this, but I'm just gonna keep doing what I always do when it comes to my reviews. So nonetheless, let's first start with the negatives that I have about this frame, and even just Tavelo as a whole. So really, when it comes to the first one, it's really just the geometry of this frame set. Now this really isn't any fault of Tavelo, but because this geometry lends itself to be more of an all-around frame as far as how it's set up, I could use a little bit more reach. I do have a long wingspan for my height, and even though I am running these 130 millimeter length cockpit, I could use a little bit more reach. So if you are someone maybe that does have shorter arms, I think that this geometry is going to be good for you, but it definitely is not as aggressive as, say, my Windspace T1500. And then the second negative I have for this is mostly for Tavelo as a brand. So with prices increasing everywhere, especially when it comes to some of these Chinese brands, it becomes more and more difficult to make an argument for going with a brand like Tavelo, because you're not going to have the local support as you would if you were to purchase from a local bike shop. And even for this frame at what, $1,600, maybe it's an open mold frame, who knows. So the price is going to be a hard buy for a lot of people these days, and especially with their new frame coming out, the Tavelo Aero is going to be like $2,000 and up. That's pretty much getting very close to the point where you probably should just go with the big brand. So I am happy to see where these Chinese brands are going, but as prices continue to increase, it does become more difficult to go with a brand like Tavelo. Now moving on to the positives, there are a lot of positives. So number one, the frame and everything as an entire package, it feels like a complete bike. While I do have more of an emotional attachment to my Windspace T1500 frame set and wheels as a whole, this feels more like a complete bike. It's completely inoffensive. It doesn't get upset over rough pavement. It handles the bumps really, really well. Now that I've done some climbing with this bike, it climbs very well. You can feel how lightweight this frame is, especially coming from something like a Windspace or a Specialized LA Sprint. This climbs very, very well, especially at the front end. Now these FarSports FS1 integrated cockpit, a little bit heavy, but they are exceptionally stiff. And so all that paired with this frame set, with these wheels, makes this ride very comfortable, but yet it's stiff enough and responsive enough when you are out of the saddle. And even on some of these climbs and descents I've done descents at like 40 miles an hour, and the frame itself is good. So the highlights of it is it's a very comfortable ride. It feels like a complete package. The rear end, the rear triangle does not get upset over rough pavement, and it definitely feels like a premium bike. It feels more of a premium bike than my Windspace T1500, so take what you want with that information. So yeah, as a complete bike, this bike is great. However, we do have to talk about these wheels. These Craft Racing Works CS5060 wheels. So when it comes to how they feel, how responsive they are, they're very comfortable, especially for this depth, and considering they have carbon spokes, they feel very fast. I love the way they feel when you're out of the saddle climbing. But this front wheel on this particular model, with the super wide internal and external width, this front wheel might be the worst wheel that I've ever tested when it comes to crosswind stability. Now I can say that here in Chicago in the springtime, we've had some really, really windy days, probably more windy days than I can recall in the last few years. So maybe that has something to do with it, but you can definitely feel that the front wheel on these CS5060 wheels, they're not really great in the crosswinds. And even when I'm descending like 40 miles an hour, I couldn't really go full gas. I probably had to go 8/10 just because I was nervous I would get some sort of speed wobbles. Now I am using 28C Continental GP5000s. Perhaps I should try to use a 30 at the front. I just don't know if that's what that particular tire size was intended for these wheels. So if you are interested in these wheels and you live in a place that does not have a lot of crosswinds, I think that they are great in that regard. But if you do a lot of descending, if you are in a place that's really, really windy, I think maybe the 50-55 version of these wheels would be much better. Obviously, because the front wheel is so light and it just doesn't have that sort of effect as it would with a set of wheels that are a little bit heavier. But yeah, it did not draw the absolute most confidence when it came to at the faster speeds when you are in the crosswinds. So overall, as a complete bike, as an entire road feeling, road sensation, the Tavelo Attack is a great bike. I think the price is very fair. It's definitely more fair than the new Tavelo Aero. I do kind of wish that I could get my hands on that frame, but at the price point for that frame, it basically pushed me to buy the new Tarmac SLA frame set, just because the price difference is a little bit closer. But at this price point, all in with everything, the specs, fantastic bike. Really have nothing to complain about, especially if the geometry works for you. And it's just crazy the kind of performance you can get How's it going? It's just crazy the type of performance you can get for $1,600 for a frame set. What's up, guys? So that is going to wrap up today's video, guys. A big thank you to Joe at Panda Podium. If you are interested in this frame or the wheels, of course, you can contact their website and they'll take care of you. So, as always, guys, see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace.